Randall wants to do a little redecorating to brighten up her bedroom. Right now, the problem is a worn-out slipper chair that needs recovering. She really needs professional advice, so she has come to her friend Marion, who actually designs and weaves exclusive fabrics for folks in the town who want something special. Marion had promised to show Betty some materials to choose from, to teach her about different yarns and how they are woven into cloth. But suddenly, she had an idea. Maybe Betty would like to see a real spinning wheel in action. Marion says a bare foot gives a more sensitive touch to run a spinning wheel. Raw wool fibers, which have been carded or combed to separate them and make them straight, are twisted or spun into yarn. Longer fibers of wool can be twisted very tightly, making a hard, durable yarn. You've probably heard of worsted, sometimes called worsted. Woolen yarns, spun from the shorter fibers and twisted less, have many little ends sticking up. The smooth twist of worsted, magnified 20 times, is a contrast to woolen yarn. The softer woolen yarn is not very strong, but the hard twisted worsted is, and stands up well under hard wear, in suits and topcoats. The smooth, hard finish of Marion's gabardine suit is a result of worsted yarns, while Betty's soft, woolly, warm skirt is made from woolen yarns. For materials requiring great strength, like sailcloth or awning canvas, 2 or more strands are twisted together, like a little rope. Here's a thread from a sample of cotton duck. 1 strong strand twisted from 4 separate plies. Sometimes multiple ply yarns are made for purely decorative purposes. This boucle is made by twisting together 2 or more different strands or yarns. But little loops are formed because the plies were twisted together at different tensions. It's pretty and unusual, but the loose, loopy yarn won't be very durable. Novelty yarns seldom give as good wear as evenly spun yarns. Here is a yarn that Marion has been spinning. This one is rather loosely spun. You can see the number and direction of the twists. But here's another yarn Marion made. What is the difference? It's all in the twist. This is an S-twist yarn, and this is a Z-twist yarn. Why do you think that is important? Weaving materials of alternate S and Z-twist yarns puts the 2 different kinks of the twist in opposite directions, and the material has a permanent crinkle. Unless you want a crinkle crepe effect, be sure all the yarn in your knitting has the same twist. Betty has learned how the yarn affects the appearance and strength of the material. But what about the weaving of the yarns? For one thing, the way the filling yarns are woven between the warp yarns has a lot to do with strength as well as appearance. Just what is the warp, and what is filling yarn? The threads, or yarns which run between the warp beam and the cloth beam, are called the warp. The finished cloth is rolled up on the cloth beam as it is made, so of course the warp will run the entire length of the finished cloth. These threads, which run under and over the warp threads, are called the filling yarns. You can see why, can't you? The filling always goes across the material, from selvage to selvage. Marion showed Betty a type of weaving process known as plain weave, the simplest of the 3 basic weave patterns. The filling thread runs over one warp and under the next. Marion does this the slow way to demonstrate it clearly. On the next row, or pick, the over and under procedure is alternated, going over the warp thread that the other strand went under. Marion pulled the demonstration thread free and showed Betty the bobbin of yarn in a shuttle as it is used in regular weaving. A simple harness arrangement is provided to lift the odd-numbered warp threads so the shuttle can be thrown through the shed. There, in one motion, is one complete pick, which can be quickly battened or pressed down firmly in place on the yarn below. Now the harness lifts out the even-numbered warp threads into a shed, and the weaving goes on. Big power-driven industrial looms work on this age-old principle. Plain weaving is simple, easily manufactured, inexpensive, and useful for many kinds of cloth, for many purposes. All other weave patterns are simply minor variations of what you have learned here. The second basic type of weaving, twill weave, is familiar to us in gabardines, serge, blue jeans, and all materials which show the characteristic diagonal rib in the weave. Here's the twill weave in wool gabardine. And it's easy to make a simple device which shows clearly how the twill weave is made. The filling goes over one warp thread, then under two warps, over one, under two, and so on. And the next row starts the process one warp thread advanced, over one, under two, and so on. The result is a diagonal line formed by the advancing filling yarns as they go over the single warp. Simple? Twill weave makes a very firm, durable fabric. Now, let's look at a model of the last basic weave, satin. The filling thread goes over from 4 to 7 warp yarns and under only one. And unlike twill weave, the next pick advances more than one warp. This breaks up the diagonal line the twill weave makes. This long, unwoven strand of yarn, called a float, is responsible for the luster characteristic of all satin weaves. Now Betty understands why satin is smooth and looks so shiny. The natural gloss of rayon or silk fibers gets a chance to reflect a lot of light. But the long, unsupported floats snag easily and are apt to fray or get fuzzy. Besides the three basic weaves, there are many complicated weave patterns, such as this jacquard weave. Pattern in cloth is important, but for strength, there is an even more important factor. This is cloth count. 140 count means a total of 140 threads, warp and filling, to each square inch. In this tiny sample, less than 1/8 of an inch wide, Betty can see the excellent balance. That is the almost equal number of warp and filling threads. This muslin sheeting has 74 warp threads and 66 filling threads to the inch. Balance is even more important in low-count cloth, such as this theatrical gauze, 28 warp to 24 filling, a total count of 52. Notice this sample, 1/3 of an inch wide. When the cloth count is too low, this can happen. Betty has learned a great deal about yarns and the weaving of cloth. While it's all fresh in her mind, she wants to choose the material for her chair. Remember, a chair gets a lot of use. Some people even put their feet on chairs. That novelty weave won't do. The little loops would be pulled and snagged too easily. This coarse homespun looks wonderful, but the count is low, and it would pull out of shape. Besides, it's too woolly and scratchy. The jacquard is beautiful, but too expensive. How about this? Smooth, firmly woven twill. That's a well-balanced, high-count weave. This is it. Why, it's the very one Marion had ready to recommend. That's the fun of knowing. You learn what to look for in buying all kinds of cloth, and you use this knowledge all your life.